Antidepressant shrooms. Rebranding psilocybin as medication. Antidepressant shrooms. Rebranding psilocybin as medication. You're listening to Technical News Reading, presented by Hakeem Alibokis Alexander on Spreaker, social podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with Uniquilibrium. This edition's reading focus comes to us from Biotechniques, the International Journal of Life Science Methods. It was published on February 1st, 2023, under the categories of Drug Discovery and Development, Interviews, and Neuroscience. Our first featured image are of some lavender, pink, and purple colored field with some mushrooms, and the caption reads, Sixtine Fleury is a second-year graduate student in the Nautiyal Lab at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire, USA. At this year's meeting of the Society for Neuroscience, SFN 12th to the 16th of November, San Diego, California, USA, she presented a poster on altered consciousness and the role of the non-hallucinatory serotonin 1B receptor in psilocybin's therapeutic effects. We had the chance to chat to her about her poster and her experience at SFN. What were some of the key takeaways from your poster presentation? One of the key takeaways is that the serotonin 1B receptor seems to be involved in the therapeutic effects of psilocybin in female mice displaying stress-induced depression, meaning psilocybin treatment improved depressive symptoms. However, I also found that, unfortunately, the male mice that had been dosed with the same stress hormone, corticosteroid, did not show improvements in depressive symptoms when treated with psilocybin. Corticosterone is commonly used to study classic selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, found on the market as antidepressants. This stress hormone was put in their drinking water for 4 weeks, causing stress-induced depression. We used a dosage of 5 milligrams per kilogram of psilocybin in the treatment group, which is high for a mouse model. An additional aspect of the study was that I administered anesthesia alongside psilocybin to test whether or not the subjective conscious experience induced, what is colloquially referred to as the trip, by psilocybin is necessary for therapeutic effects. Animal models are great because we get to study the circuit underlying these behavioral effects. However, we can't ask a mouse about what they're experiencing. What we can do is just completely remove the element of consciousness by having the animal under anesthesia during the acute effects of the administered psilocybin. However, we found that the anesthesia alone, when administered to the control mice, was having antidepressant-like effects, meaning that I can't be sure whether or not subjective conscious experience is necessary for psilocybin's effects. Do you have any idea why anesthetized controlled mice also showed an improved mental state? Yes, we did a little bit of digging, and it turns out that a lot of anesthetics have some antidepressant properties. You might be a little bit more familiar with ketamine, for example. That's being used for anesthesia, but also has been shown to have some antidepressant-like properties. This anesthesia-induced improvement to mental state is a confound we are going to have to work with. We do have another idea to remove consciousness in a different way that wouldn't involve anesthesia, but we might also try to find another anesthetic that doesn't have these properties. At this stage, have you found anything in your research that explains why male and female mice react differently to psilocybin? I'm not sure why male and female models differ when responding to psilocybin. I've seen a few posters around that are showing some sex differences with psilocybin and other psychedelics. In my study, it seems to be related to the stress hormone that we're using, which appears to be more potent in males than it is in females. What's more notable for me at this point is that a classic SSRI can improve depressive symptoms in male mice dosed with the stress hormone, but psilocybin can't. In females, there's such a clear therapeutic effect of psilocybin, which may imply that I think it's the corticosteroid-psilocybin interaction that's causing problems for the males. What were the key techniques used to generate your poster data? I developed a behavioral assay for measuring symptoms associated with depression, including lack of motivation, lack of pleasure-seeking, or the inability to feel pleasure, stress, and anxiety. This assay included what I call a 6-bottle choice preference test, in which we can measure motivation and reward using sugar water. Another task we had the mice do was the novelty suppressed feeding task. This is a conflict-based task where you put the animal, which has been deprived of food, in a stressful, novel environment. The animal must then overcome the stress to eat food placed in the center of the environment. The other two assays we employed were the elevated plus maze task and the forced swim test task, both of which are classically used to measure stress. The administration of psychedelics in healthy subjects requires highly trained staff and facilitators specifically trained to identify and manage adverse events. However, when such trials are conducted in a confined clinical setting with around-the-clock subject supervision, efficient adaptations can be considered to ensure a safe and efficient clinical approach. Do you have any comments on the recent success of the Phase 2 clinical trial with psilocybin in humans and what it means for this kind of research? I think it's really interesting. There's definitely strong clinical potential. It seems like one high dose is sufficient to induce long-term therapeutic effects. This would be a nice change from classic SSRIs, which require daily doses and usually take a couple of weeks to kick in. Plus, we don't really know which pathways they actually impact to induce these effects. One thing's for sure that we've seen from our study is that there are likely different mechanisms of action between classic SSRIs that are currently on the market and psilocybin. Another thing to note is that a lot of these human studies are showing potential with high doses of psilocybin. I would encourage people to remember that it is a powerful substance and that in a clinical setting there's a lot of potential, but I would strongly advise not to self-medicate. A lot of these studies are also accompanied by psychotherapy for months following the psilocybin treatment. What's more, the treatment is administered in a safe and well-controlled environment. Until we know more about the actual mechanisms of psilocybin and its side effects, we can't make any kind of strong statements about whether or not psilocybin should be commercially used in humans. Is it difficult to shed the stereotypical pop culture kind of image of psychedelics and establish them as a field of neuroscience research? There used to be a lot of psychedelic research, and then in the 1970s, then everything was shut down. It's only been within the last decade or so that people have been coming back to it because they're seeing real therapeutic behavioral effects. It's important to note that the pop cultural reference to microdosing is unsupported. To this day, no significant study has shown that microdosing works. In fact, animal model studies and clinical human studies are all using high doses. I think that's why I've been really interested in looking at the non-hallucinatory context of psilocybin, because it is such a powerful substance with great potential for good, but it scares a lot of people. And so, the goal is to try and develop analogs of psilocybin that don't induce powerful hallucinations, but still deliver a therapeutic effect. To accomplish this, we really need to understand what's happening at a cellular level. We need to understand what psilocybin does to brain chemistry and structure. I definitely think it's been a challenge to bring psilocybin back to pure neuroscience, but these studies are taking us in the right direction. What have been your SFN highlights? Firstly, it's really nice to see everyone gather in person. Secondly, at least in my field, psychedelics are becoming an expanding area of research. Yesterday, we had a really nice mini symposium where a lot of members of the psychedelic field were able to share what they're doing. I'm in a department where I'm one of the very few people working on psychedelics, so it's nice to see what's out there and what people are working on. The fact that this is becoming such a neuroscientific subject, investigating the molecular and cellular mechanisms of how psilocybin acts on the body, really legitimizes the topic. Because psychedelics have been connected to pop culture, it's nice to have the field recognized as a valid area of neuroscience research. You've been listening to Technical News Reading, presented by Hakeem Alibokis Alexander on Spreaker, social podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with Uniquilibrium. This edition's reading focus comes to us from Biotechniques, the International Journal of Life Science Methods. It was published on the 1st of February 2023 under the categories of drug discovery and development, interviews, and neuroscience. You can read this article and others like it for yourself by visiting biotechniques.com at biotechniques.com, biotechniques.com. Antidepressant shrooms, rebranding psilocybin as medication.